Welcome to Who We Become Life Beyond Change. I'm your host, Amanda Lentz. This is a space for honest conversations about identity, resilience, and what it really means to rebuild after life changes. Here, we share stories of loss and hope, of challenge and courage, and of becoming someone new, even when life doesn't go as planned and the future feels uncertain. Whether you're navigating illness, grief, transition, or simply searching for meaning after change, you are not alone here. And I'm so glad you're here. Let's begin. Welcome back to Who We Become. Today's conversation is about a particular kind of story that's very hard to tell. Not because the events are too dramatic, but because for a long time there weren't any words for them. You know something's wrong, you can feel it. But the mechanism of what's happening, the manipulation, gaslighting, the slow distortion of your own reality doesn't have a name yet. And without a name, it's hard to see, very hard to leave, very hard to even believe. My guest today was that person in college. And then she spent years carrying what happened in her body, her relationships, her identity, and eventually her health. Crohn's disease, autoimmune illness, and the kind of exhaustion that doesn't have a clean explanation on any paperwork. She has written all about it in her memoir, Unfolding Origami: The Abuse, the Delayed Unraveling, the Body That Kept Receipts, and the Slow, Stubborn, Sacred Work of Coming Back to Herself. She is now the trauma therapist she wished she'd had. I'm honored today to welcome Loren Galese. Loren, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This is an honor to be able to share my story in a podcast setting and kind of have an open discussion about some of the things I didn't have, like you said, had a name for years.
And I want to set the stage for anyone listening that this may be a difficult
Mhm,
conversation. So if you
mhm,
are listening, please, as Lauren walks through her experience, know that you can take a step back. This was Lauren's journey. We want to honor it. And Lauren, thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your experience and giving those who may have experienced something similar the
mhm.
words and the voice for what you've been through.
Yeah,
And
yes.
so I'd love to start with your memoir. The title Unfolding Origami is so precise, and I love just the imagery that it conveys because there's so many layers when it comes to origami. And so, what did being folded actually feel
Mm.
like? Not in hindsight, but as you were living that experience.
It's fascinating to me that I can still feel it. Um, I don't know how to explain that I can go back into that mindset. It was almost as if I had to make myself consciously smaller in an awareness place, not like I can't fold my arms up and become smaller. It was an awareness. So which actually is dissociation. I didn't know that then, where you are not fully present in a moment. But then I as certain things were happening, I it's as if like I took a step back, was sitting emotionally like in a corner, like folding myself like smaller, and I was like, no, no, I can't recognize whatever is happening. I'm not ready to. It's easier to just accept whatever someone is telling me, whatever someone is doing to me to survive.
And one thing that we had discussed at the beginning, and something I think is really important, is to discuss, the language behind some of these
Mhm,
words.
mhm,
What one thing that had come up was coercive control, and so for those who may not be familiar, or again may not have the language,
mhm,
can you just provide an overview of what coercive control is and what it means?
mhm. it's I actually looked up the actual definition, so I wasn't, like, inserting what my experience was, and then I can go off of that, but coercive control is a form of abuse where the main goal is to degra degrade, isolate, and deprive a person of their rights to physical security, dignity, and respect. So I know that that's just, like, a mouthful right there. But what that does is it puts the victim in a state of terror and entrapment.
Mm.
And this can include anything from monitoring their movements, isolating them socially, restricting access to like finances, employment, education, medical care. So it can include a lot. It's a spectrum, and it's all within like this kind of idea of if you don't do X, it's like coercion. Which I know I'm using the word, but I guess how that looked for me was because I was in college and I was a freshman, it was kind of I was a virgin, I guess. That's an important piece. So certain things were framed to me that through my suite mates, if you don't want to have sex and you lose your virginity, like what's wrong with you? Are you a prude? Um, I can just tell this person X, Y, and Z. I could just spread rumors about you. That was a later on moment. So it was like using this control to influence how I reacted, which kind of made me lose trust in myself and then footing in reality.
And to think back and as a freshman in college, I mean, so young to be
Yes.
experiencing not only this new life of, entering this world of college, but also, I mean, you tech legally are an adult, but still
Yeah.
still a child and to have to navigate through this as well. And so, what you had shared was that you didn't quite have the language for
Mm-mm.
what was happening, but you just knew that something felt wrong.
Yeah.
Um, and so what was your experience like knowing that something was wrong, but you couldn't vocalize it or you
Hmm.
couldn't find the right words to share?
And that's such, and in that in of itself is really hard to put into words because so I guess some background is I was a freshman. It was my first semester. I met all these new friends. I had a suite style dorm, and we all got close very quick. It was one of those bonds that was like it felt like it was months. We knew each other when it was like a week because in college time you live with people, so time changes. Or it felt like it changed for me. We grew very close with um another boys' dorm down the hall. It was just it felt like, okay, now we just unload all of our personal information. Um, and it went straight to sex, intimacy, and I clammed up. I felt like Snow White in some ways because they one girl was very snarky and she just seemed more worldly. Another one, she pushed you to like your boundaries. Where I was just like, okay, maybe like I'm just like I come from a small town, like I don't know much. Um, so that was kind of like where that's actually where that started was like me feeling uncomfortable with like certain conversations. And not that my friends at home didn't talk about sex. It was just the way it was talked about. Like, why haven't you done it already? Just get it over with. Like, you're not even gonna enjoy the first time. And I said, well, I read a lot of romance books. I kind of want it to mean something. It's like, don't. We'll find you someone. And what that turned into was finding a family member of that girl, and pictures of him started appearing. And then his name started appearing. And it was like, haha, this is funny. But I got a pit in my stomach. And I was like, is this a joke? Is this, should I be interested? I'm not. I don't even like the way this person looks. something feels off. But then there was like already this bond formed where I immediately felt, and this goes probably back to like my own insecurities, if I didn't at least talk to him, there was going to be something wrong with me. I already was a prude. I already wasn't a virgin. And then I could choose not to talk to him. That's not what happened. But so that feeling, and I just couldn't. But when somebody, I would say, like, what's wrong? I'd be like, something feels off here.
Mhm.
This is not just a joke. Now he's being called to be like, hey, do you want to talk to my roommate? It just, the words still are hard to like, it's kind of like when you see I guess something that's out of place. You're like, this doesn't fit here, but it's a feeling internally.
And I can only imagine what that was like where you're trying to navigate these new friendships and relationships and, just the social construct of college, while just recognizing internally that just something isn't right. Um, and so, I think underneath it all, you were almost questioning yourself. Why
Mhm,
don't I like this? Why don't I like him? What is it? And I'd love to talk a little bit about a word. We spoke about coercion, but gaslighting, and
mhm.
that is a word that is used pretty frequently.
Oh,
But
yes.
many people don't really fully understand what it means, and so what it and truly what it does to a person,
Oh,
um,
yes.
internally. And so, can you share a little bit about your experience, um, with gaslighting and what that was
Mhm.
like?
Yeah, and the history behind gaslighting is really interesting, like the term. So, gaslighting, the actual term, is a form of psychological manipulation and emotional abuse. And the perpetrator will persistently, it's not just one time, distort the truth and denies the reality of a situation so the victim doubts their own memories, their perception of reality, their sanity. So often I think on social media I see people saying, um, I don't know, you disagreed with me, you're gaslighting me. That's just a disagreement. So I think anytime if somebody is feeling uh, like something is wrong, I would always recommend looking up like the actual term and definition through either a licensed professional or um, the National Health Institute will have actual documented like definitions. Um, and it's not just written by somebody's experience. Um, my experience was starting like kind of around when his pictures, I guess, started appearing. And I think there was like writings on my whiteboard outside my room, like uh, Lauren and Ralph going to get married. And I'm just like, there's, you mentioned this person when when I came out of class that like I was going to meet him. He doesn't go to our school. I don't know him. I just met you. And now this escalated pretty quickly. So like I went to the roommate's room and I said, this is weird. Um, And she was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna call him to see if he wants to talk to you." And I said, "What if I don't wanna talk to him?" She's like, "You're being dramatic. Um, just like just go with it, like, calm down." And then other people in the room started saying, "Stop being sensitive about anything. Stop thinking the, like, wrong thing was going to happen or the negative thing was going to happen. You're such a negative Nancy. Um, you have issues trusting, why can't you just be happy?" Things like that. Um, there was one person who was neutral, which I was grateful for at the time, but it's really hard because I didn't have I've never lived by myself at that point, and your whole like system of like I don't know, people you bounce ideas off of are saying, "You're being weird. You're the weird one." So I was like, "Okay, I'm being the weird one." So when things started progressing and things started to get worse and worse, I went back to the rationale that it was my problem. So that's
Mm,
really like how gaslighting can really affect someone.
absolutely. Where you know how you feel, but you have everyone around you, this close, this form,
Mhm,
new group of friends who are completely not supporting you or recognizing
mhm,
uh, how you're feeling. And so, to have your opinion constantly contradicted or invalidated,
mhm.
um, what did that do to you in the way that you trust yourself and ultimately make decisions?
That's something I am still learning 20 years later. So what it does is, or what my experience has been with that is, so it started with like I didn't want to bring up my concerns or my feelings about something, not just to the friends, but future relationships. It was almost as if like I had to, in my mind, rehearse it to make sure it sounded plausible. Um, Even if the other person was like my mother, I'd be like, okay, how can I present this that she gets I'm uncomfortable? And she'd be like, Lauren, that's enough. You don't have to like say all that. Um, but at that moment, as like things started getting, of course, like timing is wonderful. As things started getting worse, I didn't talk about the things that were happening. I only confided in his cousin, who was my roommate, because that was the closest connection. And that's just the dynamic that kind of happens, the isolation, the emotional isolation. And then you feel like, well, this person knows them best. If I have a question, I'll go to them. But it keeps that circle very small.
Absolutely. And was there a moment where you realized your sense of reality perhaps had been distorted? And what was that like?
So that moment came many years later. That wasn't something that happened quickly. And the studies now say that it takes about 7 to 10 years for someone to sometimes realize that they've been through a traumatic event, such as domestic, sexual, emotional abuse, um, which is why a lot of states now are fighting for like different statutes because people don't know until years later. Um, I didn't realize my reality had been so like skewed until what was it, 2021. I had COVID and it turned into long COVID. And so I was just in bed watching documentaries. I came across one, it's called The Vow, and it's about a cult in Albany. And I became addicted to it, where I wanted to know everything about it. The cult leader looked, v- let's just say, very similar to um, the assailant. And I was like, why do I feel so connected to the women that this, then there was like a subcult that was like a sex cult. I said I felt so connected to a point where I was like, I need to do something from my bed with post COVID. Um, and it hit me when I was talking to my therapist that week, virtual, obviously. She kind of teased the idea, not like coming out and saying, she was like, well, what about it? And I was like, wait, these manipulation tactics were used on me. Also, it wasn't just sexual assault. Um, I didn't know until that point, but I knew something was still wrong. I didn't think I had fully covered everything. It was like a page was like sticking up out of a binder, but I couldn't read it.
Wow. That was just oh my gosh. And so you had gotten to the point where, you know, I it seems like you did you end up meeting Ralph? Did you end up getting together, and
Yeah.
is there, you know, a relationship, it sounds like, where there was just continued challenges. And so one thing you've talked about is, and you wrote about in your book, is that the trauma doesn't end when the relationship does.
Oh.
And so what happened in your body and the life and your life afterwards?
Oof. There's some things I think there's a lot of things right after I think I have blocked out, and I sometimes get angry because I'll say to my therapist, "I want to know everything," and she said, "Sometimes your brain is protecting you and doesn't want you to know everything." But some things I remember is well, it started while I was talking to Ralph, just through technology, like Facebook, um, phone, but I started, being nauseous. I couldn't eat. I couldn't keep, like it just some people with stress, they will either, like, eat more or you just can't I couldn't eat anything. Um, so I got very skinny. Um, and I noticed I couldn't rest. Like, yes, I could lay down and go to sleep, but my body was tight everywhere, especially on my shoulders, my neck, and my head. So laying down, I felt like my body was like a wood uh, a piece of wood because it was so rigid. And then after I I remember breaking out in fever sores like all over my lips, and then I started spiraling and I'm like, I have a disease, I have this. It was none of that. It was from stress. Which I didn't know that was a thing at the time, but I couldn't sleep. And I the emotional part that turned into the physical was I became obsessed with like cleaning things, that everything needed to be clean because I felt violated and the situation felt dirty. So I did bizarre things like doesn't make logical sense. I knew it at the time, cleaning my bedspread with Purell because I was like, that's alcohol. That gets things sanitized. But like I just couldn't rest because I wasn't resting until like everything was clean. Um and there was a lot of internal chatter, which was just repeating the words like um just negative slurs like you're a slut, you're dirty. Um I don't need to go into more than that except that it was very negative.
Gosh, it's just I just want to stop and thank you for sharing this. And I certainly,
Of
for
course.
anyone listening, if you are in any type of
Mhm,
situation, and Lauren, I think we can understand perhaps some of what you've been through just with you sharing. Certainly not going to ask you to relive all of it, but anyone who's in a situation where, you find yourself resonating with Lauren, please reach out,
mhm.
speak up. And so again, Lauren, thank you for um,
Yeah.
your vulnerability. And so you've described being highly functional and quietly falling apart at the same time. And so it
Yes.
sounds, you had your cleaning, but you were still not resting. And so why is it so hard for others to potentially see that, and for you living with that so hard to admit?
I know there was, like, a thought and, at the time when I was in college, mental health was, like, acknowledged. People went to therapy, but it was not in any way, shape, or form the way it is now where people openly talk about their therapist.
Absolutely.
Or they'll say, like, "Oh, I needed to, work on this, for a couple of months." It wasn't like that. So somewhere in my and I always had dealt with anxiety as, like, a teenager, just worrying about, like, typical teenager things, but, like, it would sometimes keep me up at night. I was a very physically active, kid, teenager where I was always in sports, and if I wasn't in sports, my brain would just spiral. So, I think that for me, it was hard to admit, like, something was wrong, not because my parents said ever said, like, "You need to be perfect." It was my own standard of, like, "I just need to keep going." Um, and if I stopped, I had to recognize that something had happened, um, because that was, like, s part of, the folding that happened was I created a reality where if I was the girlfriend, it was okay what happened. It was just more digestible, um, which doesn't make any logical sense. That shouldn't happen. Well, anything that happened to me should not have happened, regardless of what title you have, married, whoever. It doesn't happen. It shouldn't happen. But in my brain at the time, that made it okay because I was turning 19 and that was, yeah. So I turned it into this reality that and so to function meant I was okay until I couldn't function and I collapsed, like, not physically collapsed, but I did that until I was 23 and my body was like, yeah, you can't get out of bed. We don't know what's wrong with you."
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Mhm.
And so I'd love to talk a little bit about the physical
Yeah.
manifestation of that, just the stress that you held, and holding yourself and to this high standard and still
Mhm.
functioning, but not truly living. And so you had shared you developed Crohn's disease
Yeah.
and other autoimmune illness, in the aftermath of your experience. And so what do you understand now about the relationship between what happened to you and what you had lived through, and now what happened, in your body?
So, it's interesting because sometimes it's like you kind of read one doctor's opinion, they'll say one thing, you read another one. As I've been trained in trauma since, there's very clearly a brain gut connection. Your brain is not disconnected from your body. So your brain plays a huge role, like what you're emotionally going through into how your body responds. There's a huge nerve, it's called the vagus nerve that runs from the base of your skull all the way down to your stomach. And it also plays a huge role in the survival techniques: fight, flight, freeze, fawn. So if you're constantly in hypervigilance, not resting, um, feeling like you're on alert or you need to run or you're not safe, um, not talking about your feelings, like stuffing them, not acknowledging what happened, your body eventually is going to shut down. And this is what I think. I don't think there's an actual article on it, but I think eventually it will come out. There's a lot of immune disorders that are connected to trauma. I'm not a doctor. This is as much as I understand with what I've recently read. Your body can only hold so much. And I know recently they've been talking about trauma being stuck in the fascia, which is like the skin. But recently, neuroscience came out with something that it's stuck in like is it neurons? So that's it doesn't replace it, it just changes it, but it correlates to how you behave and how you are
Mhm.
able to live. If you're not living or you feel like hypervigilance, I describe it, just constantly feels like you have to run away from like a bad guy. Like you're constantly like looking over your shoulder. And that's kind of how I was living. I don't know how long. Um, I would think like I was scared at my college graduation because I thought he was going to be there. Um, and through the course of my time in college, there were things that happened with the old roommate that I did not feel safe. So, there's a lot of things that made me believe, like, maybe, like, it was a bit I don't wanna say dramatic. It was a bit far-fetched, but in my mind, it wasn't that
Of course.
he was going to come after my family, he was gonna come to graduation. Feared he was just gonna show up everywhere.
Wow. And to live in that just constant state and yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is such a connection between the mind and the body, and now it's manifested in the way that you are physically. And so you you had mentioned earlier that now you are trained in trauma response, and you describe becoming the trauma therapist you wish you'd had. And so, what does that mean to you? Just not necessarily as a professional accomplishment, but as a personal one.
So, the trauma therapist I have now, I've had for 10, maybe 11 years. I lose track of what year I found her. Um, I don't say this lightly, but she saved my life. Because not just in the body, but, like, in the mind, like, even though I got help for, like, my Crohn's, figured out what it was, got treatment, I still, like, logically knew I was sexually assaulted, knew certain parts, but I did not I thought, "I'm going to become a therapist. I don't need that." Arrogantly, in a very silly way, thought I could just teach myself, and that didn't happen. I went through really bad flashbacks where I saw him, but he wasn't there. Like, it was almost like shape-shifting, and I was like, I don't know what's happening." Because when people say, like, "Oh, I'll deal with it, like, I don't need to think about it." It it's going to come out in the most wild ways, and it I was one of those stubborn people thinking, like, I knew better, and then I found this therapist who she trained me, she treated me with something called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which I know that is very long, but it's short for EMDR. And it's based I then got trained in it years later, but it's bilateral stimulation. So your eyes are either moving or you're holding something that physically is like tapping, or you're tapping while you're going through the memory. The therapist is guiding you through. So it's not disturbing and it's not no longer bothering you. Um, which was phenomenal. It was hard, but it saved me. So when I say the trauma therapist I wish I had, because when everything was happening, I saw counselors on campus, and this is not blaming them because it was a very different time too. Um, I saw out people on campus, or I would say things, and people would kind of just look at me like confused. So
Mm,
I don't that would not happen today. That would be I think anything even close to what I said, like, I feel like if I say something I would say, it would go into, like, a different topic, but I would make a comment about a situation I was in, and they'd kinda look sideways, but they'd keep going. Um, so I think of what would I have needed in whatever the person is I'm talking to in this moment, um, and I try to be very gentle. I may be overly cautious, but I'd rather be that way.
absolutely. Well, having lived through trauma yourself, I mean, you have such a unique perspective on how to help others navigate. And again, going back to just bringing voice and bringing words to be able to share the situation. And so, what's it like? And not asking for any specifics, on those that you work with, but
Yeah, of
now to
course.
be on the other side, to sit across from someone who may be where you once were, and to now have the language and to be able to support them, whereas you didn't have that initially. What's that experience like?
There there's not one emotion. Some days it feels like actually just the other day I told my mom, I said, "I'm going to, just, like, stop being a therapist," and she was like, "Okay." But sometimes I just feel that it's a lot, and then the next morning I wake up and I'm fine. Some days, especially like, I have a couple clients that I've known since they were in middle school or high school who are, they're in college now, they're about to go to college. I've watched them grow up, and some of their stories are very difficult. So, I'll admit, internally, it can be hard for me to not want to, like, go to bat and take on their emotions, and I know I'm not the best at that internally. Do I do it in the session? No. Emotionally, that's very hard. And then other clients, I can be fine with. I think it's the ones who there's like some similarities or something
Mhm.
that I can't explain to you what it is. There's just something that gets me fired up internally, and I'm like, well, I need to go to like set it or I just kind of go off. But I calm down.
Sure. Well,
Um,
it's
yeah.
a human emotion. I mean, for you to see the parallel journey that someone else is going
Mhm.
on that's similar to yours, I mean, of course, there is always going to be emotions where, you're human. You've
Mhm.
been through something traumatic. You've now taken this experience to help guide others, but there's always that human element.
Mhm.
I can imagine in any conversation you have.
Yeah.
So with your memoir, and I'd love to close just understanding a little bit more. Um, what what made you decide to write it as a memoir rather than a more clinical or even advocacy piece?
I never thought of it. I don't know why that never popped into my head to do it clinic. I actually never intended to put any clinical anything in it until, I don't know, maybe a copy editor down the line. Somebody suggested, like, putting in little things here and there, and I was like, "Actually, I really like that." Um, I actually never planned on doing this at all. It came after I watched that documentary, and, um, my dad, was on hospice, so I couldn't go down. I was living with my parents to, like, help, but I couldn't, like, go downstairs or, like, I was restricted because I had long COVID, and they didn't know anything, so I couldn't see him. Um, so I was in my room a lot, like, on the phone with people, and someone was like I made a comment that I would make, um, usually in sarcasm, and someone was like, "You should write angry letters to these people, try to get it out." And I was like, "I tell people to do that, sure." And then it turned into an outline. And then someone was like, "I have an editor friend. Would you like to meet on Zoom?" So it never was intended. It then just came out of me. It wasn't something I was like calling in. But once I wrote those letters, I was like, I can't, no, this can't be inside me anymore. And I just wanted to have somebody feel like, oh, somebody else felt like that? Okay. There's change, there's hope. I'm not gonna feel like this forever. Okay.
That's beautiful. And once, I'm sure that was so freeing too, to just be able to get it on paper and know that you know, through your clinical work and now through your memoir, you are helping others again. And I just go back to bringing voice and bringing language to
Mm,
those who may not be familiar or be, um, have the words or really the confidence to speak until they've seen those who have been through it and now are on
mhm.
the other side. And so, who is the person that you hope most finds your book? And is there anything that you hope they feel or learn from it when they read and finish?
I think somebody maybe who has gone through something, maybe hasn't fully named it, hasn't given it words, maybe hasn't wanted to acknowledge it. and they read it and something changes inside them and they're like, well, now that I've seen this, I can't unsee this. I can't feel what I felt. I need to change, whatever that change looks like for them. That's that was the goal, was for somebody to read it and feel inspired to change whatever circumstance they had going on.
That's beautiful. Well, Loren, thank you. And, you know, a woman who spent years folded into a shape that someone else designed and who did the slow, stubborn, sacred work of unfolding anyway. Loren Galese's story is a reminder that healing is not a straight line. It doesn't end when the situation does. It lives in the body, resurfaces in the health, and asks things of us that no one warned us to expect. But it also offers something no one warns us about either: the possibility that surviving gives you language, a clarity, a capacity to sit with others in their hardest moments and say, I know what this is. I have a name for it now, and you are not alone in it. If you're carrying something right now that you don't yet have the words for, I hope this conversation gave you some. Loren, thank you for your honesty, your vulnerability, for writing your book, for doing the work that you do, and for bringing your conversation here and sharing it with me and everyone listening. We
Of
will
course.
link Unfolding Origami in the show notes. So that way, if this story is something that resonates with you or someone you know, you have a resource. And until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and keep becoming who you're meant to be. Thank you for joining me today on Who We Become. I hope this conversation reminded you that growth isn't always easy, but it is always meaningful. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need it. And if you haven't already, be sure to follow, rate, and review the show. It truly helps these stories reach those who may need a reminder they are not alone. Remember, what happened to you is part of your story, but it is not the end of it. You are not defined by what happened to you. You are shaped by how you rise. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep becoming who you're meant to be.